This is the Debate Hour. And now in this corner, your host, Errol Mars. And in this corner, who gives a shit?
All right, we're going to start this week in football because we had the Hall of Fame inductees. We had two defensive backs that were inducted, both from the 2020 and 2021 class. So better DB that was just inducted into the Hall of Fame, Troy Polamalu or Charles Woodson?
Go ahead, Speedy.
I'm going to go with Woodson just because I think he could do more. I think Polamalu was a more dominant safety, just being a safety, but Woodson being able to play corner, being able to play safety, and playing for a long time and for a position that's usually very hard to do in the NFL. Evolved with the game very nicely, played in a lot of bad Raiders defenses too. I won a Super Bowl, obviously, with the Packers. I think Woodson was just all around in terms of a DB value, the better player. Polamalu, I know a lot of people say there was batting coverage, but I wouldn't go that far, but Woodson was the better all-around. I'm going to go Woodson.
I like Troy Polamalu because he was fun to watch, exciting with his hair. He's the first player in history that put an insurance policy on his hair, his head and shoulder commercials. I love Charles Woodson. He played multiple positions. He's one of very few players that have won a national championship or a Heisman Trophy, Super Bowl championship, an MVP, Defensive Player of the Year. I mean, the guy was unbelievable. Charles Woodson was an all-around sensational player. But Polamalu just had that spark, that personality that really sold me. So I'm going to go with Troy.
All right, who is a better player, NBA, Vince Carter or Paul Pierce?
Go ahead.
I'm going to go Vince Carter on this one. I think his longevity was just too impressive to not pass him up. Paul Pierce, obviously, more points per game, but I think a lot of the longevity, Vince Carter coming off the bench for a lot of teams, kind of dragged that total down. He was a more efficient three-point shooter in his career. I think could do more with the basketball. Obviously, his dunks were amazing, and he had just a little more well-rounded. And except for the Raptors, he didn't play on as good as teams like Pierce did with the Celtics. So I'm going to go with Vince Carter.
I love Vince Carter, but Vince Carter never won. And Paul Pierce in the playoffs was lights out, playoff-driven player. The regular season doesn't sell me. It's what you do in the playoffs. So Paul Pierce, he won a championship. Yes, he played with Kevin Garnett and Ray Allen. But there was a reason why they called him what? They called Paul Pierce the truth. Paul Pierce, 110%.
All right, let's go to baseball. Who is a better outfielder, Ruben Sierra or David Justice? I'm going to go with David Justice because I like his playoff numbers a lot more. He had 14 home runs. They're kind of similar where it comes to all-around hitting numbers. Both were kind of semi-good batting average guys, but none of them had the standout 300-type year. Sierra stole more bases, but that was really the only big advantage he had. In the playoffs, I really think Justice really that makes a difference. So I'm going to go with Justice on this one.
It's David Justice. Ruben Sierra was a good player, and he was fantastic, especially with the Oakland Athletics. When he went to the Yankees, David Justice, he did it everywhere he went. He played very well, even at the end of his career with the Oakland Athletics. He was a big part of that streak that they had. What was it, 18 games? I love David Justice. I also love the fact that he was married to Halle Berry. So I'm going to give it to David Justice just because of that.
That is true. I forgot. Halle Berry's your celebrity crush. Yes. That's right. We'll go to the NHL now. Who is a better winger, Brian Propp or Steve Larmer? I'm going to go with Propp on this one. Another guy that I think his playoff numbers, I think, were a little better.
You never get a chance to see him play.
I know. I was looking at both their numbers. I didn't see either one of them play. I'm doing it based on what I know of stats. And Propp had, I think, more playoff points as a whole. I think he was a finalist, I think, a couple times for a Selke trophy, or at least at his position was very good defensively. So I'm going to give a slight edge to Brian Propp on this
I like Steve Larmer. It's what Larmer did with the Chicago Blackhawks, what he did with the Rangers in '94. Fun, captain, leader, rough, mean, never had a smile on his face. You never saw him happy on the ice. He was never happy enough, even when he won a Stanley Cup. I don't even think I saw a smile on his face. I'm going with the mean and tough Steve Larmer.
All right, let's go back to the Hall of Famers for football. Better recent Hall of Fame offensive lineman, Alan Faneca or Kevin Mawai? I'm going to go Faneca on this one. I think both of them had good longevity at the end of their careers, too. So I think that kind of cancels. But I think Faneca, what he did on a Steelers team that was more known for their defense, I think, as a whole than their offense. I mean, they had a couple good offensive players, but that was more of a defensive team. And he did it for steady for a long time with those Steelers teams, those two teams that won championships, too. Kevin Mawai had some great years for the Jets, great years at the end of his career, too, for Tennessee. But I think at the end of his career with Tennessee, he played on good offensive lines, too, with Michael Ruse and David Stewart and guys like that. So I'm going to give a slight edge to Faneca.
The anchor on the offensive line is the center. And Kevin Mawai, when we talk about Mangold, when the Jets brought him in and when they drafted him, they wanted to replicate Kevin Mawai. And Kevin Mawai was an outstanding, he's a Hall of Fame center. There's not many centers that you can compare or contrast a guy like Mawai. Now, Alan Faneca, he had a fantastic career with Pittsburgh. He played the guard position. There are a lot of good guards, naturally, that came out of teams that made it to the Hall of Fame. Now, I'm not saying Alan Faneca is not a Hall of Famer, but Kevin Mawai, at the position that he played and the dominance that he played at it for 7-8 years, not just with the Jets, teams before that, I think the longevity at the position that he played and the dominance, I'm going to give it to Kevin Mawai.
All right, let's go back to baseball. Two of the closers that Brian Snow mentioned in the Sports Lab Mouse when he was on the show a couple weeks ago. Who was better, Dave Righetti or Dan Quisenberry? So I'm going to take Righetti in this one because he had a lot of years with 100 strikeouts, which is hard to do for a relief pitcher. 163, 169 strikeouts in certain years like that. Granted, I don't think his longevity was as good as Quisenberry's in that time, but he also had a lot of ERA-type seasons right in the twos and tons of save seasons with 30 or more saves. I think, again, his peak was better with Quisenberry, but I think the strikeouts definitely give Righetti the edge, and I think better year-to-year consistency-wise.
I'm going with Dave Righetti. What I loved about Dave Righetti is because he was gritty. Gritty Righetti, that's what they called him. And the guy worked his ass off. He wasn't those guys like the Mariano Rivera, guaranteed every single year. But when he went out there, he would put you out with the strikes. He would go after the strike zone. I love Dave Righetti, so I'm going with Dave Righetti.
All right, I'll go to the NBA now. Better big man, Larry Nance or Alonzo Mourning? So I'm going to take Alonzo Mourning in this one. Both of them were great defensive players, but Alonzo Mourning was better block shot guy throughout his career, better field goal percentage, more efficient shooter in his career. And I think he had very good longevity, bumped around a lot of different teams in the 90s and then into the 2000s as well. I think that helped out a lot, and I think he stayed good for quite a while, at least as a big man, even though he wasn't the same offensive threat later in his career. I'm going to go with Alonzo Mourning.
Oh, it's definitely Alonzo Mourning. Now, Larry Nance had a great career, but he's not a Hall of Famer. Alonzo Mourning is a Hall of Famer. Now, Nance had some sensational seasons, really 4 or 5 seasons that he was a top player at his position. But what Alonzo Mourning did with the Miami Heat and the Charlotte Hornets, the time that he played with Grandmama and Muggsy Bogues, he was a leader. He was a tough leader, and he was the guy that was the backbone of those Miami Heat teams and those Hornet teams, not Grandmama, Larry Johnson, or Muggsy Bogues, or even the Tim Hardaways of the world. It was him. He was the backbone. So I'm going to go with Alonzo Mourning.
All right, back to hockey now. Both guys are obviously still playing, so this is their career right now. Who's been a better center so far, Nicklas Backstrom or Anze Kopitar? So I'm going to take Kopitar in this one. I think he should have won MVP the year Taylor Hall won MVP. Very well-rounded player. The difference is Nicklas Backstrom always had the benefit of Alex Ovechkin. I think that helped him a lot. The Kings were always more of that defensive team. They didn't have as much offensive talent around Kopitar. His longevity has been very strong, only starting to regress a little bit now the last 2 years. Great defensive guy. I think he won 2 Selke trophies in his career. Great face-off guy in his career in defensive center. So I'm going to go with Kopitar.
First of all, Backstrom plays with Ovechkin. He makes everybody around him better. And he's a sniper. He's putting the puck in the net. Kopitar, he is the man on that line. He's the best player on the line. He's the best player on his team. So I'm going with the best player on his team. I'm going with Kopitar, the goal-scoring phenomenon.
All right, back to baseball. Who is a better catcher? Probably the 2 best catchers of all time. Pudge Rodriguez or Johnny Bench?
I could tell you who that is.
This is very close, and again, 2 best. You don't think so? No. I'm going to take Johnny Bench. I'm going to take Johnny Bench because of his postseason prowess. Pudge Rodriguez was a bigger guy. Obviously, he could hit for that kind of power.
He did steroids.
You think he did steroids?
I know he did steroids.
So I'm going to take Bench. I think him hitting 300 home runs for a catcher at that time, that 70s era of baseball, where there was home runs, but it wasn't like a big power position. Like obviously, catchers, they're known for power now more than they were back then. And I think him working with the pitchers the way he did, not that Pudge didn't do that. Both of them were great with Gold Gloves, but I think Johnny Bench hitting the home runs at that time was more impressive.
And you know what I say about steroids? In just MMA and combat sports, I think they should not be using steroids. In any other sport, they should be using steroids. But if you're going to compare him to one of the greatest catchers of all time, if you're doing steroids, that's an advantage that you have. Johnny Bench didn't do that. Johnny Bench is the best catcher, I believe. Besides Yogi Berra and some of the old-timers, Johnny Bench is the best catcher of all time. Fantastic defensively, offensively, did everything right, good leader, mean son of a bitch, you know what I mean? Not a very nice guy, but all in all, fun to watch and sensational. And by the way, he wasn't even the best player on his team when he was at the dominant side. We all know who the more dominant player was.
You can bet on that.
You can bet on it. So that Cincinnati Big Red Machine was as good as any team we've ever seen.
Mm-hmm. All right, one more. Back to the NFL. 2 Hall of Fame just recently inducted coaches, Bill Cowher or Jimmy Johnson. Who is better and why? I'm going to take Jimmy Johnson in this. Now, Bill Cowher obviously has more wins because he coached longer, but we all know Jimmy Johnson was wrongfully fired by the Cowboys and that whole Jerry Jones saga. Then he went to the Dolphins, helped build a little bit of something there. He wasn't a obviously super dominant coach at Miami, but he had a couple winning seasons, built some good players on that team. Cowher in the 90s had a couple good teams, but wasn't the same all around. And then obviously in 2006, that team was loaded. So I'm going to take Johnson because I think he could have definitely done more with obviously what happened with Jimmy Johnson.
No salary cap when Jimmy Johnson was running the team. He had the best team, best players around. He had the best team money could buy. Cowher built the team. He was the heart and soul of that team. Even the time that Tomlin won, his best players came from Cowher's drafts. So I'm going with Coach Cowher because of what he did and how he built that Pittsburgh Steelers team from the 90s to even now in the 2000s. He was the mastermind of that team. So I'm going to go with Coach Cowher. So
lots of Hall of Famers today in honor
Yes,
of the Hall of Fame induction ceremony this past weekend.
Fun to watch, too, by the way. Peyton Manning's speech was fantastic. Fantastic.
I mean, would you really expect anything less out of Peyton Manning? He's one of the most entertaining just people, not even just personalities.
And Tom Brady went there to support Peyton Manning. All the great players that were there, he was there to support his friend Peyton Manning. So,
right, yeah.
And who would have thought? I mean, people think that they hated each other. They love each other. They have a lot of respect for one another. They love playing against one another. Both two of the greatest quarterbacks of our era, two of the greatest quarterbacks to ever play the game. And they're both very good friends. So it was great to watch. And Tom Brady, and he made a joke that whenever Tom Brady actually goes to the Hall of Fame when he's 60, 65, and people started laughing. So.
Yeah, when he makes the Hall of Fame in 2035 or something like that.
Yeah, it was funny.
That was funny. I was waiting for him to say something like, maybe we would have entered the future by then or a new time portal when he enters the Hall
He might not even be alive when that happens.
They might have to reconstruct it. They might need to have a whole second building just for his accomplishments or something.
Yeah, it's crazy.